Can Ridley Scott's kind of war cinema make Hollywood's version look too clean? That question feels provocative, but these 10 British war films explain why. Scott's world is built on pressure, command, spectacle, moral conflict, and men cracking under history. And these classics carry the same DNA. They do not just show battles, they expose pride, fear, empire, sacrifice, and survival. By number 1, the influence becomes impossible to ignore. The Hill, 1965. This is not a battlefield film. It is a war movie trapped inside a punishment machine. The Hill takes place in a British military prison camp in North Africa during World War II, where the enemy is not outside the wire, but inside the system itself. Sean Connery plays Joe Roberts, a defiant soldier thrown into a brutal detention camp where prisoners are broken down under the blazing sun. At the center of the camp is a man-made hill of sand and stone, a pointless torture device prisoners are forced to climb again and again until their bodies collapse and their dignity disappears. That simple image becomes the whole movie's nightmare: war as discipline, command as cruelty, obedience as violence. Sidney Lumet directs it with raw, claustrophobic intensity, stripping away glamour, hero music, and patriotic comfort. Every shouted order feels like a weapon. Every silence feels dangerous. For an American viewer used to war films about victory, The Hill is a colder shock. It asks what happens when an army fighting tyranny begins to mirror the brutality it claims to oppose. This is not about courage in battle. It is about surviving authority when authority becomes insane. And that makes it unforgettable. In Which We Serve, 1942. Some war films are made after history. This one feels like it was made while history was still bleeding. In Which We Serve came from 1942, when Britain was not looking back on World War II as legend. It was still living through it. Co-directed by Noel Coward and David Lean, the film follows the crew of HMS Torrin, a British destroyer, as their lives are revealed through memory after the ship is attacked and sunk. That structure gives the film unusual emotional power. It is not only about naval combat, it is about families waiting at home, officers carrying impossible responsibility, sailors trying to stay human, and a country learning how to endure loss without turning it into melodrama. Noel Coward brings stiff upper lip restraint, but David Lean's emerging visual style gives the film scale, rhythm, and atmosphere. The ship becomes more than machinery. It becomes a floating piece of Britain. Class, duty, sacrifice, fear, and loyalty all packed into steel. For American audiences, this is not the loudest British war film, but it may be one of the most revealing. It shows a nation selling courage not as spectacle, but as discipline. Quietly, firmly, and almost painfully, it earns its place. The Cruel Sea, 1953. The ocean does not roar like a villain here. It waits like a grave. The Cruel Sea is one of the most sobering British war films ever made because it understands that naval combat is not always heroic, loud, or clean. It follows Royal Navy officers and sailors escorting Atlantic convoys during World War II, where the real terror is patience, endless gray water, freezing nights, unseen submarines, and the knowledge that one wrong decision can send hundreds of men into the sea. Jack Hawkins gives the film its hard moral center as a commander forced to make choices no decent man should have to make. The power of the film comes from its restraint. It does not romanticize war at sea. It shows exhaustion, guilt, survival, and the brutal loneliness of command. Every sonar ping feels like a heartbeat. Every explosion feels less like action and more like judgment. For American viewers used to war films built around bold missions and clear victories, The Cruel Sea offers something harsher: the war of endurance. These men are not chasing glory. They are trying to keep ships moving through a floating battlefield. And by the end, the film's title feels almost mercilessly perfect because the sea is not cruel with anger. It is cruel because it does not care. The Battle of Britain, 1969. Before Britain could win anything, it first had to survive the sky falling on it. The Battle of Britain turns one of World War II's most decisive air campaigns into a tactical, sweeping, and surprisingly disciplined epic. Directed by Guy Hamilton, the film recreates the summer of 1940, when the Royal Air Force faced the Luftwaffe in a fight that could have opened the door to invasion. What makes the film powerful is its sense of scale, without losing the human pressure underneath. The dogfights are thrilling, but the real drama is in the control room rooms, the radar stations, the exhausted pilots, and the nervous commanders trying to read a war moving faster than any battlefield map can handle. The film does not turn every pilot into a superhero. Many are tired, young, scared, and painfully replaceable. That makes the aerial sequences hit harder because each burning aircraft feels personal. For American viewers, this is a reminder that Britain's war story was not only trenches, ships, or stiff speeches. It was a desperate defense fought above farms, cities, and coastlines, where a handful of pilots became a wall against catastrophe. It is old-fashioned in shape, but still impressive in impact. Sometimes a war film earns its greatness by showing how close a country came to disappearing. The Dam Busters, 1955. This is not just a mission movie. It is a film about turning impossible science into wartime terror. The Dam Busters dramatizes the famous Royal Air Force raid of 1943 when British crews used Barnes-Wallis's bouncing bomb to attack major German dams. On paper, it sounds like a clean, heroic adventure, brilliant inventor, daring pilots, impossible target, historic mission. But the film works because it understands the strange tension between engineering and sacrifice. Before the planes ever take off, the story builds around obsession, failure, testing, doubt, and the quiet pressure of men trying to make a weapon work before time runs out. Michael Redgrave gives Wallace a thoughtful, almost haunted quality, while the aircrews carry that very British blend of humor, discipline, and fear. When the raid finally begins, the suspense is not just about survival. It is about whether years of calculation can survive one terrifying night over enemy territory. The film's influence is enormous, especially on later mission-based war cinema, where planning becomes as dramatic as combat. For American viewers, The Dam Busters offers a different kind of war spectacle. It is not about brute force, it is about precision, nerve, invention, and cost. The victory feels impressive, but never weightless. That is why it still lands with such force. Zulu, 1964. Few war films begin with defeat hanging in the air and still build toward legend. Zulu recreates the Battle of Rorke's Drift, where a small British force defended a remote mission station against thousands of Zulu warriors in 1879. The film is famous for its scale, its disciplined tension, and Michael Caine's breakout performance, but its real power comes from the slow tightening of dread. At first, the soldiers seem almost trapped by routine. Officers argue, men wait, the landscape stretches wide and silent. Then the Zulu army appears not as a simple enemy, but as a massive, organized, intimidating force with rhythm, strategy, and presence. The film's politics are debated for good reason, and modern viewers should watch it with that awareness. But as battlefield cinema, its craftsmanship remains extraordinary. The defense unfolds like a pressure chamber, ammunition running low, fear spreading, formations breaking, pride colliding with survival. For American viewers, Zulu is fascinating because it is not a typical victory film. It is a last stand myth built on anxiety, discipline, and imperial contradiction. The spectacle is gripping, but the shadow underneath is even more interesting. It shows bravery, yes, but also the uneasy weight of empire. That tension is exactly why the film still refuses to fade quietly. The Longest Day, 1962. Some war films show a battle. This one tries to show history moving from every direction at once. The Longest Day is not purely British, but its place on this list is earned because D-Day cannot be understood without the British, American, Canadian, French, and German perspectives colliding in one enormous military gamble. The film follows the Normandy invasion with a massive international cast and a striking black and white style that gives it the feeling of a battlefield record rather than simple entertainment. What makes it so gripping is not just the scale, but the structure. Command rooms, beaches, paratroopers, resistance fighters, German officers, and terrified soldiers all become moving pieces in a machine too huge for any one man to control. British involvement gives the film one of its strongest layers: discipline, planning, miscommunication, courage, and the terrifying uncertainty before the landing. The movie does not reduce D-Day to one heroic speech or one perfect charge. It shows confusion, it shows waiting, it shows men acting bravely while barely understanding the full picture. For American viewers, that is the value of this film. It reminds us that victory in Europe was not a solo myth. It was a brutal, multinational operation where timing, weather, intelligence, and nerve decided the fate of thousands. Its greatness is not subtle. It is monumental. And sometimes monument is exactly what history demands. The Bridge on the River Kwai, 1957. This is the war film where honor becomes a trap and duty starts looking dangerously close to madness. The Bridge on the River Kwai follows British prisoners of war forced by Japanese captors to build a railway bridge in Burma during World War II. On the surface, it sounds like a survival story, but David Lean turns it into something more disturbing, a psychological battle over pride, discipline, obsession, and identity. Alec Guinness gives one of classic cinema's great performances as Colonel Nicholson, a British officer who believes that maintaining military order will preserve his men's dignity. But the deeper he goes, the more his moral compass begins to twist. The bridge becomes more than wood and steel. It becomes proof of British superiority, proof of endurance, proof that humiliation can be turned into achievement. And that is exactly what makes the film so uncomfortable. Is Nicholson resisting his captors or helping them? Is he protecting his men or sacrificing reality to his own idea of honor? For American viewers, this is essential because it refuses to make heroism simple. William Holden's character adds a more cynical, survival-driven perspective, creating a clash between ideals and instinct. The film is grand, beautiful, tense, and deeply ironic. Its ending does not just explode a bridge, it explodes the comforting belief that duty always leads to wisdom. That is why it still feels dangerous. The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, 1943. This is not a war film about winning battles. It is about watching an entire idea of Britain grow old. The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp is one of the most unusual and emotionally intelligent films ever made about war, empire, friendship, and national identity. Created during World War II, it follows Clive Candy, a British officer whose life stretches across decades of changing conflict, from imperial adventure to modern total war. At first, Candy seems like a comic old soldier. Proud, polite, stubborn, and trapped in traditions that no longer fit the world around him. But the film slowly reveals something richer and sadder. He is not simply foolish. He is loyal to a code of honor that history itself is destroying. That is where the film becomes powerful. It asks whether decency can survive when the enemy no longer follows gentlemanly rules. It asks whether old values are noble, naive, or both. The friendship between Candy and a German officer gives the story unexpected tenderness, showing how war can turn enemies into mirrors and time into a battlefield of its own. For American viewers, this is British war cinema at its most layered. No simple flag waving, no easy villainy, no cheap glory, just a nation arguing with its own past while fighting for its future. Quietly, elegantly, and almost heartbreakingly, this film becomes a masterpiece of moral change. Lawrence of Arabia, 1962. If one British war film looks too massive to belong to ordinary cinema, it is this desert-born giant. Lawrence of Arabia is more than a war epic. It is a study of myth, ego, empire, identity, and the dangerous seduction of greatness. David Lean turns the Arab Revolt during World War I into a visual experience so vast that the desert itself feels like a character, beautiful, cruel, endless, and indifferent. Peter O'Toole's T.E. Lawrence is not presented as a simple hero. He is brilliant, theatrical, brave, vain, wounded, and increasingly consumed by the legend forming around him. That is why the film still feels modern. It understands that war does not only destroy bodies, it can also distort the self. The battles matter, but the psychological transformation matters more. Lawrence begins as an outsider trying to influence history, then slowly becomes trapped inside his own performance of destiny. For American viewers, this is essential because it challenges the usual war film comfort zone. It gives spectacle, but questions spectacle. It gives heroism, then poisons it with doubt. It gives empire, then exposes the bargain underneath. The images are unforgettable, but the unease is what lasts. Ridley Scott's kind of cinema, scale, dust, power, moral contradiction, lives in the shadow of this film. Number one is not just deserved, it is almost unavoidable. Ridley Scott built his cinema on scale, pressure, discipline, and moral conflict. And these 10 British war masterpieces feel like the foundation stones beneath that vision. They prove war films do not need easy heroism to be unforgettable. Sometimes the strongest stories come from duty, guilt, pride, and survival, and that is exactly why Americans still need them.